Thank you. And now that I know that what I'm going to say will be double-checked afterwards, I'm a bit more worried because I had to put together a rather complicated, the word complex is overused, just complicated conversation twice in a single narrative. So for those of you who were with me, forgive me for what I have misunderstood, forgotten, misinterpreted. We can start from this mixing up, and I try to help our imagination by using the following analogy. We live in a mangrove society. Mangroves grow where sweet water meets the salty water, where the river meets the sea. Asking where the mangroves grow, is the water salty? Is it sweet? Do we live in a digital world? Do we live in an analog world? Means, as my students would say, you must be from the 90s. It means not knowing, not having understood where we are, which is this intrinsically mixed environment where the analog and the digital, as we heard this today, live in a cycle of mutual interactions. More and more. It doesn't mean that a lot of people live entirely on the digital side or entirely on the analog side, but most of us, and an increasingly number of us, live in this special sort of world. In this world, navigation is difficult. And the second reference that I would like to suggest is actually back to Plato. As a philosopher, can't resist. The pilot of the ship, the kybernetes, from which cybernetic comes, is the person who knows how to navigate difficult waters with undercurrents, perhaps sometimes against the winds, and may actually take strange directions in order to get where he, normally he, but sometimes she, wants to go. And if you know how to sail a little bit, not that I know much about it, sometimes you have to go almost opposite to where you aim to end up. So that kybernetic, so that sort of ability to have a direction with foresight, because you need to know where you would like to end up, and control, which was another big theme in our panels. Those are the virtues of the sort of cybernetic politics, capital P, that we would like to see implemented, especially because the waters are perilous, especially because the winds are fast. In other words, precisely because change is happening so quickly. At that point, another reference might come handy. Sometimes the best way of moving fast is to go slowly, festina lente, as they would say back in my own town. The idea is that you can go very quickly, slowly, because the idea is here is to think before acting. And that was one of the things that emerged. Think about what? Well, I have here a list of sort of highlights, and I'm sure I'm missing some. But the fundamental point was that we need not better, but just understanding. It implies that you already have some understanding and you can improve on it. At the moment, I think we lack some real, true understanding of what's going on in our society, the impact of personal identity, how we behave in this new environment, and more needs to be done in that context. A clear understanding of how values are changing, because no matter what we're told, at the end of the day, if there's a social backlash against a policy, against a particular product launched by a company, the policy and the product will not succeed. I know it's further down the road, and sometimes we forget that it takes 3, 4, 5 steps, to get there. But the idea is, if this is not properly designed, it will not fly, using a different metaphor. So how do we make sure that the right design is there? Well, we need new models for benefit sharing, something we haven't seen much recently. We need new models to incentivize the right kind of socially valuable services, products, new environment. At the end of the day, we might actually need new meta-technologies, technologies that help us to handle technologies. Because complexity, in the technical sense, in the computational sense of complexity is just going to increase. And we do have a trick to deal with increasingly complex things. We develop more complexity to deal with complexity. It can be a successful story. In terms of story, and I know that my time is coming to an end, so I'm slowly moving towards the second half or third of my summary. In terms of story, I know that there is a tendency, we had for a moment that temptation during the 2 workshops, of either going for done it before, seen it before, come on, nothing new, or it's a revolution. Nothing ever compares. Of course, no, people with grey hair get a bit bored and they start aiming for the boring middle ground, the grey area. So it's a bit of new, a bit of old. But what's the difference here is that what we need to write is essentially the second chapter of our interaction with digital technologies. It doesn't mean, for example, that we need to drop consent. Of course, consent when it comes to personal data is still a keystone of our building, but it does mean that we need to move forward. So you don't write the second chapter by erasing the first chapter, but you don't write the second chapter by making a photocopy of the first either. And it's that interaction in terms of learning lessons and moving forward that some of the tricks here need to be played. Where about exactly? Well, we covered a few areas, key areas. You may expect the usual suspects, and they were there. Health, economy, education, and more broadly, business slash technological innovation. In each case, I think we could be a little bit more daring. And if I may sort of refer back to something that Robert himself said today, we could try to experiment a little bit more. But you experiment in safety, remember, festina lente, when you have the rules of the game that tell you, yeah, you can do that with safeguards. Just give it a try. We need to do that a little bit more carefully. Now, final point, there's something at the same time interesting and disturbing when it comes to the new technology, as in new from a philosophical perspective, not as from last year, that we have developed. Think of, back to the salty and sweet waters. If you remove salt, what remains is not salty. It's just not salt. If you remove sugar from a cake, it's not sweet. No, there is no sugar. But if you remove information, that is informative. If you remove politics, that is political. So the technologies that we are developing are, to be less sort of obscure, self-referential. We have technologies that work with themselves, about themselves, increasingly in an autonomous way. We can be the cabinet mastering the whole system, or we can just step out and think, well, fingers crossed, hopefully everything will go fine. Part of the discussion during the 2 workshops was precisely to say, no, we can be playing the controlling, the sort of directing role here, while we see these technologies working with themselves, about themselves, among themselves. I don't need to remind this audience that the greatest, vast majority of data we have are machine-to-machine generated. They are not about our own conversations. So the conclusion here is that we are missing a lot of things, but there's a lot of enthusiasm and brain power to deal with these missing bits. And I would like to end with this particular challenge that remains with me. That was my own personal feeling at the end of the 2 workshops. We have been in vaguely comparable circumstances not such a time ago. The environmental crisis, in that context, fast technologies, ethics and values and policies had to catch up. We ended up by having not a solution, but a direction, sustainability. And here is the challenge that I would like to leave to this audience, and if you have an answer, please let me know. The biosphere is related to sustainability as the infosphere is related to what? We need to work on that what. If we have that what, we will have a direction towards which our politics can move. Thank you.
Homework, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, does anybody who's participated in that conversation feel there's a big missing thing, please?
Yes, I would like to add some more NGI narrative-related conclusions, in particular the 4 points made by one of the speakers, Paul. He said that the NGI narrative should be more inclusive, no one left behind, that the NGI narrative should treat everyone as an individual, which in my opinion is the most radical. He said that the NGI technology should be simpler and address all senses, not just the digital. And finally, that it should not be utilitarian, but better life vision. Because he said too often the weakness is that the EC approach to critical infrastructures, cybersecurity, banking crisis, energy crisis, is seen from the government and operators' viewpoint with little user demand angle. So instead of just looking at supply-side investment, funding, and market intervention, we should look to education and citizen empowerment for better societies, which is the role of politics.
Well, that's useful. I nest that under the word safeguards, which Luciano used, because I think if there were understanding around some of those issues which go to our discussion yesterday of purpose and values, maybe more people would feel more happy with more experiments.
It was fascinating, especially you say that the biosphere is related to sustainability as the infosphere is related to water. And so I dare suggest a partial answer to this, which was mentioned yesterday, which is collective intelligence. So the infosphere could be the key to generate the collective intelligence which we need to fight the sustainability problems.
That's very interesting. When you say this, I think of the Tower of Babel, which is somewhere in the infosphere. If there are no other comments on Luciano's presentation, then we come to the third and last, and I was wrong when I said it would be given by Joachim, it will be given by Guido Romeo, who actually chaired the meeting. Guido.
Thank you, Robert.